Chapter 1. Apart from the power of money, there is also the power of miracle. Even though Thien, the youngest son of the retired Deputy Commander-in-Chief, Royal Thai Army, had been rushed to the hospital after having heart failure, and was saved from the brink of death by the ER unit, the medical team concurred that his heart muscle almost stopped functioning, since the young man had abused his life to its limit. The only way to save him was a heart transplant. The hospital urgently contacted the Thai Red Cross, and a miracle happened. The organ donation center told them that a donor had just passed away from a car accident less than an hour earlier. The blood type and the organ tissues matched with the young university student who had registered in their database 2 years prior. Thus, the patient who was holding onto the lifeline under a ventilator was prepared for an urgent heart transplant. Lady Lalita and the general anxiously waited outside the room. A woman in her 30s, face sheen under the makeup, accompanied them with a sour face even if she was concerned for her rascal of a younger brother. "It'll be hours before the operation is done. I think you both should wait in the waiting room. Someone will inform you once it's done," Pimp suggested. She was dying to wash her face from the cosmetics. "How could you say that? Your brother is in major operation. We don't even know if he'll make it." Lady Lalita reprimanded her middle child. Pimp pressed her lips together, irritated, and stared into the busy operation room with her big round eyes. The 10 years gap made the brother and sister not that close. She didn't know how to express her distress. Whenever she met him, she would complain about his errant behaviors that got worse each day, and always ended up having a fight with him. "As you please, Mother. Now, if you'll excuse me." She turned to leave, ignoring an upsetting stare from her mother. 5 hours went by. Apprehension and exhaustion gripped the hearts of 2 people waiting outside the operation room. As soon as they had a glimpse of 2 moving shadows behind the door, they jumped from the seats and stood right in front of it. A few minutes later, the chief surgeon walked out, followed by his team. They smiled at the family who remained hopeful.
"Don't worry, the operation went well, but the patient must remain in the ICU for 5 to 7 days for infection surveillance."
"You're saying he will be fine?" Tears welled up in Lady Lalita's eyes from elation, now that death couldn't take her son away from her.
"It depends on him. His will to live plays a major role, because after the transplant, he must be on immunosuppressant drugs all his life to prevent the body from rejecting the new organ. He'll get sick easier, so even if he can't start living normally again, he has to take greater care of himself than normal people do."
The renowned medical expert and the medical professor advised about life after transplant, which can be called doable but not easy. The patient's mother went silent. Her son's lifestyle didn't make it easy to promise if he'd be able to make the most from the new life. Still, she hopes that Thien would live his new life to the fullest for the donor, who could no longer breathe and enjoy their time on Earth. He never slept so soundly and deeply before. Sometimes, when he came to the surface, there would be someone pulling him back into the slumber. Thien's slender form on the bed slowly moved the hand that had laid still. Light brown eyes peered open and looked around the room through the thin plastic shield over his nose. Tubes that were connected to machines and life support equipment besides the bed made it easy to guess where he was, even if he had just come to. Saline and blood IVs were connected to his wrist. Hell looks just like a hospital. Suddenly he became fully awake. Hospital. That meant he was still alive. The sound from the heart monitor and the irregular pulses alerted the ICU nurse on duty to contact the doctor in charge. He rushed towards the room and checked up on the patient. Thien? Please calm down. Breathe in and out. Easy. The young nurse counted the breathing so the patient could follow her instructions. This method prevented hyperventilation and oxygen toxicity overdose. The young man tried to keep up, but it tired him down as his heart was drumming under his chest, as if it wasn't a part of him. A moment passed and the drugs kicked in. Thien breathed out slowly, exhausted, as if he had just been through physical exertion.
What happened? I remember that.
The baritone voice that came out of his lips were so coarse, it surprised him. You had a heart transplant. Don't worry. Everything went well. Now you're recovering. The woman in the white nurse uniform gave him a reassuring smile and turned to report his condition to the medical team and assistant who had just arrived, leaving the patient with a stunned expression to himself. The almond eyes slowly glanced down at the rising chest in sync with his breathing. He was afraid. Echo of an organ that contracted and pumped the blood to other organs in his body rang loud in his ears. The chill crept over his whole body until his toes became numb when he realized that it wasn't his heart. After the heart transplant, the doctor had diagnosed him thoroughly that there was no infection and the body had adapted well to the new heart. They released the patient to go home for convalescence. He, however, must comply with a follow-up regime. 3 weeks after Thien had returned from death, he tried to forget that something in his body didn't belong to him, though sometimes he wondered who it once belonged to. He knew the rules and regulations about organ donation too well. Donors and recipients cannot reveal their identities to prevent the lawsuit against each other. The young man in a light blue hospital gown gazed blankly outside the open window and took in the late morning fresh air. The sunlight glistened on his smooth, fair skin that didn't look as ghostly as before. It was now flushed pink, telling how well the heart was working for its new owner. Thien looked down at his hand that was no longer bony. It looked healthy from the hospital's strict nutrition programs, and he could no longer drown himself in alcohol and substances. He heard the chief surgeon say he was lucky that he was diagnosed fit enough to have an organ transplant. He almost didn't make it to the table, and if he had to wait longer, the operation wouldn't have been successful from the risk and complications. The almond eyes showed deep sorrow as he looked around the VIP room, filled with gifts from his classmates and professors, but no one came to visit him in person. Thien couldn't blame them, because it was he who turned his back on them, even on his best friends, in the first place after finding out about the disease. He couldn't stand to see them enjoy life and the future ahead of them. What about his friends from the supercar racing gang, though? A sneer appeared on the thin lips. They came together just to piss on society, so it wasn't surprising that there was no real friendship between them. He became too weak to make troubles and was deemed useless to keep around. Thien glanced at the wall clock and frowned. It was past the time. His mother had told him that she would take a moment to talk to the doctor. He was afraid that there was something wrong with his body and he wouldn't be allowed to go home today. An indistinct conversation coming through the door of the recovery room roused his curiosity. He slid out of the bed and dragged an IV pole with his frail self. Turning the knob and opening the door slightly, he leaned in to eavesdrop. The senior doctor's expression was strained hearing his parents' words, but he remained firm, following the medical code of conduct.
I can't tell you. Even if you ask the Red Cross, they will not tell you.
We just want to repay the donor. A John Kit. Lady Lolita pleaded. She knew the donor did it out of pure heart, but she wanted to thank the person by giving the family some money so they'd know how great merit it was to give someone a new life. The other man let out a heavy sigh. He understood the intention of the general and his wife, but there was not much he could do.
Well, I might be able to write you the name of the donation registration unit. Then it's up to you how you'd find out.
Dr. Crit finally gave in. He gestured and invited the two influential figures to continue talking in another diagnosis room. The donor. A slender hand slapped on his left chest when he felt an irregular beat for a millisecond. Thien peeked through the gap and found two nurses talking. "You're Adjarn Crit's assistant. Do you know who the donor is?" a nurse asked her colleague standing next to her. "No idea. Adjarn guards all his documents, but the Red Cross staff who delivered the organ said it was from someone who died on the same day when the general's son was admitted to the hospital." Thien swallowed thickly. His forehead broke into sweats, trying to suppress the thrill so his new heart wouldn't work too hard. He wondered if he was supposed to be hearing this piece of information or not. Yet, it was urging him to want to know what he wasn't supposed to know. The family mansion stood regal in the middle of an estate complex built for the richest in the heart of Bangkok. For someone who never strayed from home longer than 3 days, Thien was now staring at the big house surrounded by the lush garden as if he'd never seen it before. He was thrilled and happy to be there again, thinking about how he could have been 6 feet under. A special nurse who was hired to assist the frail patient supported him as he got out of the luxurious car and sat down in a wheelchair. All of his belongings were moved to a guest room on the first floor for convenience. His parents filed for a dropout at the beginning of the semester of his 3rd year since the doctors had advised him to spend at least 3 months in recovery before resuming his normal routines. The young man shrugged, indifferent. Even if he would graduate later than his classmates, at least he was still alive and could achieve it later. Lady Lalita entered the makeshift bedroom and checked everything before sitting down on the bed next to her son. She stroked his silken hair, now showing its natural brown color instead of the haphazardly red dye that had been there. "I'll call your barber to cut your hair, darling, so that you'll look as great as ever." She smiled happily upon seeing the sign of life and joy on his face. Thien nodded in response and stared at his mom. Suddenly, the burn of shame scorched through him, realizing how badly he'd hurt the person who loved him the most. All this time because he hated his own faith. "Mom." He placed his hands over hers, the most plump and yet the warmest. "Are you angry with me?" The lady gently smiled. "I'm angry at myself. Had I paid more attention to why you got sick often, took you to the doctor, you could have had your treatment a long time ago."
It was myocarditis. Even if it was detected earlier, we wouldn't be able to cure it anyway.
He reminded her that it was no one's fault. "I'm happy it's all over. From now on, you have to take good care of your health. Quit all the bad things that hurt you." She meant smoking and drinking, and the fighting that sent them to the police stations regularly for the past 2 years.
"I know,"
he said, irritated, because he didn't want to be reminded of his mistakes. Then something came to him.
"About the donor."
The words got stuck in his throat as soon as he opened his mouth. "Yes? What about the donor, darling?" The mother tilted her head, wondering why her son suddenly went quiet. Thien pressed his lips and shook his head.
"Nothing. You'd better get some rest. I want to sleep now. These medicines make me drowsy."
He changed the subject and lied down. "Yes, take some rest, my dear. I'll tell the servant to give you dinner when you wake up. She draped the blanket over him, then silently left the room so that he could have a full rest. After the door was closed, Thien opened his eyes. The shapely brows were knitted. He wanted to slap his own mouth for slipping out the question he shouldn't have asked. Even if he might never know who his heart belonged to, he could still go on living his life. But what if he knew? Would it change anything? It had been little more than a month since he came home. A nutritionist took care of him, and a physiotherapist instructed him how to do the right exercise. He was feeling much stronger. Sweats were seeping from his hairline, now cut short, and revealing the opal-smooth face as if he had become a freshman again. Thien, who was now wearing a workout outfit, had been doing intermittent jogging and fast walking on the treadmill for more than half an hour. He would have passed out after a 10-minute workout if it was a few months ago. The cool, air-conditioned room with glass walls filled with DVD and video games was converted into a small fitness room. All of the new workout equipment was placed here and there, a picture of awe to a man who had just entered the room without knocking first. A handsome gentleman in thick, rectangular eyeglasses shook his head with exasperation and adoration. If it wasn't over the top, then it wouldn't be this family. He looked over at the timer on the treadmill control board from behind and pulled down an earbud from the man doing the workout, hearing a blast from the headphone.
It's written here that do not work out for more than 30 minutes per day.
The visitor waved the sheet with an exercise schedule for the man in convalescence.
Pite.
Thien cocked his eyebrow, surprised at the sudden visit from someone close to him. Trajan was a 6th-year medical student at his university, a son of a chief of staff, and the right-hand man of his father. Trajan pressed the stop button on the control board.
Working out too much isn't going to make you healthier in 2 days. It even strains your heart.
Thien shrugged. Okay, he would stop. Lifting the towel draping over his neck, he cleaned off the sweat on his face.
Lady Lolita made you come to see me?
He asked. Trajan was not much older than he was, unlike his real brother and sister, so his mother often prodded the man into taking care of her youngest son since they were children.
How could you say that? Even if she didn't tell me, I would come to see you anyway.
Trajan was busy with a hospital internship in another province, so it was difficult for him to find the time to come to Bangkok.
For how long are you staying this time? Can you take me out tomorrow? I'm fed up getting stuck at home.
He didn't want to bother his brother from another mother too much, but only Trajan, the prodigal medical student, who had gained the utmost adoration and trust from his mother, could ask for permission to take him to see the outside world. He didn't understand why she was so afraid that he might contract any infections.
I tried in my shift, so I've got a few days off. I'll ask your mom for you.
The medical student answered gently. It had been quite some time since he'd seen the younger man in such a good spirit. For the past few years, he couldn't bear talking to Thien for longer than a minute. Those beautiful eyes were filled with darkness that sucked him into giving up on life.
Have you come by yourself?
Thien opened the bottle of water and put it to his lips while listening to the answer.
No, I'm with Dad. He's got some important documents to deliver. What is it about?
Trajan shook his head, frowning.
No idea. Why do you want to know? Just curious.
Thien acted disinterested, but he could guess why Trajan's father visited his father today. The man was the problem solver of his family, whatever the issue might be. He even bailed Thien out countless times in 1 year. I'm going to take a shower and change, then we'll talk. Change the topic before the quick-witted man could notice.
I have to talk to you about something. See you at the pavilion.
The future doctor shouted after the younger man, who paced away and got a wave as an answer. After Trajan had taken advantage of his handsome face, a gentle voice, and a heartful plea, Lady Lolita finally allowed him to take the prisoner out on a free day. The first time ever in 2 months. Thien, who was in a faded diesel pair of jeans and a hand-painted big, loose t-shirt with bright colors, was applying hair gel on his short dark brown hair in good spirits. The oval, beautiful, handsome face that resembled his mother's was flushed, the evidence of how much his health had improved. The thin lips smiled at the reflection in the mirror, appreciating the new life that was given to him. A knock on the door told him that the man had come on time. He grabbed his backpack as Trajan opened the door without waiting for the answer, and rushed out the words.
"Are you finished? Come on, hurry up before your mother changes her mind." All right. I'm done. Let's go."
He grabbed the future's doctor's arm and pushed him out the door, fearing he wouldn't get a free day out of prison. Finally, here he was, sitting like a trophy boyfriend so Pixie could take him to lunch in a luxurious mall downtown. Then, Thien went in and out of designer stores, intending to max out his credit card for new clothes. The latest series of leather and canvas sneakers in red and white from Vans looked cool. The spring limited edition leather belt from Armani too. Trajan, who was carrying the shopping bags full of items with ridiculous price tags, shook his head in exasperation as he saw Thien's lean form slide in the Salvador Ferragamo store. The young man put on brown-tinted sunglasses that fit with his youthful face and turned to ask for his opinion. "How does it look, Pite?" The man grinned, feeling like a sugar daddy who took his sugar baby on a shopping spree, just that the sugar baby was a multi-millionaire who asked the daddy if there was anything he wanted. "Looks nice," he answered with a thumb up. Thien did a hand gesture to the staff that he was taking this one. "You sure you don't want anything? You just broke me out from the prison," he joked. Trajan chuckled. "No, I really don't. I'm fine with stuff from open markets." Beautiful almond eyes glanced sideways at the older man. "Was that sarcasm? Not like I care, I got loads of money." The high society young man nonchalantly shrugged. "I know you do." The honorary and the temporary bag boy lifted up the shopping bags. "But you should stop funneling your donations into brand name stores. I'll take you to make merit with underprivileged kids." "I'd rather put my money in the bank then. Those shelters are too hot for me. I'd rather not go there myself," Thien said, and signed the credit card slip with the sum of nearly 20,000 baht. Trajan looked at the son of a former general with exasperation. He couldn't really blame the guy, though, because Thien was simply a spoiled brat. "How could you make merit if you can't give up your comfort?" "Who said I want merit?" Thien raised his chin in defiance. "Can you stop talking nonsense? I don't believe in good or evil." He didn't understand how doing or sacrificing something for someone could bring happiness. Trajan lifted his hands in defeat and changed the topic. "Are you hungry? Want to eat anything in particular?" "Japanese food." "Okay, so let's go to our regular restaurant. I'll give you a treat. But right after I pick up the books I've ordered from the shop on the 4th floor. Thien nodded obediently. He was so starving his guts twisted in his stomach. When they arrived at the mega bookstore, he had to carry his own shopping bags. The young man put them down on one corner and looked at the magazines, waiting for the other man. He glanced aimlessly across the covers, then stopped at a bi-weekly tabloid with gossips about high-flying names and celebrities. The headline was about a car crash of a son from a famous goldsmith family that owned many goldsmiths across Thailand. The accident killed a person 2 months ago, but the story seemed to die down because of the bribes paid to the police. The offender's face in the photo taken at the police station was blurred haphazardly, as if the outlet wanted to hint at his identity. Thien grabbed the magazine and flipped the pages. The details he read made him pale. Sweats were seeping on his forehead, and his heart was thundering with a silent plea inside his chest. He jumped when a big hand slapped lightly on his shoulder. Trajan was staring at the ashen face of his younger brother from another mother and frowned.
"Are you all right? Maybe you walked too much and got tired? You took the meds, did you?"
The future doctor shot him a series of questions with concern. Thien stood stunned for a moment and forced the words out.
"An attack in my bowels. I gotta go to the toilet."
He didn't wait for the other, but put the magazine back on the shelf and paced out from the bookstore. Thien rushed towards the nearest restroom and quickly locked the door. He fetched the phone and scrolled through the list, then punched the number of a guy in his racing gang. A friend closer to him than others. A familiar voice answered a few moments later.
"Thol, it's me, Thien." "Yeah, hey, what's up? You okay now? Sorry, I didn't visit you. My dad grounded me overseas. Just got back to Thailand a couple of days ago." "I'm feeling much better."
Thien went quiet for a moment and asked about what he'd been stuck in his head.
"Let's cut to the chase. Do you know anything about Visano's car accident?" "Hell yeah, I do. I was racing alongside him on that street, but I wasn't the unlucky bitch that hit someone."
The voice trailed off as the speaker was remembering the event.
"I remember that you went home earlier that night. Visano had to fill in your spot in the racing. You gotta thank him, man. If he didn't take your place, it could have been you killing someone."
Thol said jokingly, without knowing the other end was feeling nauseated on the toilet seat. All jigsaws started to fall into place. Thien kneaded his throbbing temples.
"Where can I find the details about this shit?"
The other man made a high nasal noise.
"Why the heck do you want to know?" "I've got my reasons. You think you can give me a hand?"
Thien knew Thol was good at getting information from blackmailing people, because he knew shady people who knew shady people, being in a family that made profits from nightclubs and underground casinos.
"Alright. You used to help me juggling the chicks, so I'm gonna help you out this time, free of charge."
Thol finally agreed.
"I'll contact you within tomorrow, promise."
"Thanks a lot, man." After hanging up, he was pulling at his hair, angry at himself for just doing another stupid thing. After you know the truth, then what? There was no answer but the silence, no answer except the rushes of his beating heart.
Dun-dun, dun-dun.
Pleading, it seemed.